Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today we are going to be talking about training points, how to spend them, where to get them, everything that you need to know about training points in Wizard101. Now first off, let's start out, what is a training point? Well, training points, you can see them on your character page right here. You can see I have 23. Now what training points allow you to do is it allows you to train spells from schools that aren't your own. So for example, I'm death. Every death spell in this game that is exclusively death, I can get for free if I train it. Every other spell would require one training point to actually train. So you have a limited amount of spells you can train from other schools beyond your own. Now getting training points is actually quite easy. You earn training points from just leveling up, but there are also quests to do it. From levels 1 to 20, you get a training point every 4 levels, so that will end up with 5 training points. And then I believe every 5 levels after that, you earn a training point. Now there, as I mentioned, are many quests that you can actually earn training points from, so I'm going to quickly list all of them. Obviously, I'm not going to go over every individual one, but I'm going to list where you can get them, so if you need more training points, you can go earn some more. So first off, you get 1 from the Enrollment to Ravenwood quest. You can get 20 from Prospector Zeke quests throughout the Spiral. You can get 5 from the Eloise Merryweather quest, which I believe are in Arc 2, to go find some flowers and stuff. You have 3 quests from Ogden Peak and Celestia, which are all crafting quests. You can get 2 quests from Inyanga White Stripes and Zafaria. There are 4 quests from Francis Lux and Avalon, only 3 training points in total though, because one of those quests is just a precursor to the second quest. 1 from Zoltana the Mirror Mask in Chrysalis, who is right at the beginning of the Chrysalis World Hub area, and then 1 quest from Preservationist Zach in Lemuria, and then 1 from Louise May Queen in Lemuria. So obviously those are like the fake doubles of Zeke and Eloise. Those are all the places you can get training points in Wiz. Now, I personally haven't done every single one of those quests, but I imagine you can get quite a bit of training points from doing all of those quests. I've probably done less than half of them, and I haven't even used all my training points, as you can see. So realistically, you're probably not going to need to do all of those, but I figured it was worth at least mentioning all of those. So now that you know what training points are, let's get into where to spend them. Now, how I'm going to divide this video up, because there is a lot of spells, is I'm going to just go from world to world, from the earliest you can train these spells to the latest. So we're going to start with Wizard City, and then we're going to work our way up. Now, starting in Wizard City, first off, let's talk about the other schools and what schools to train beyond your own. Now, every school in this game should train up to Faint in the Death School of Magic. Faint is at level 22, and if you come to Nightside right here beyond the waterfall, you can train all the way up to that Faint card. And the reason why this is so good is that this is going to be the spell you want to use on every boss in this game. It is a plus 70 buff to the enemy, and it puts a plus 30 trap on you. I don't even have Avenging Fossil on this wizard. That's crazy. Some people are going to think that's crazy. I don't have the level 88 spell on my death. Don't think about that. Training up to Faint will allow you to beat most bosses in the game, and once you get Potent Trap later on, which is later in this video, you're going to be able to double stack Faints, which is going to be so useful. It's how you take out every late game boss in this game. Faint is essential. Out of all the spells in this video on what to train, this is going to be the one you need. Every other spell you could probably get by without training, except for maybe enchants, but Faints you need. Now next up, we can talk about the other schools. Personally, I don't really like dual schooling. If you want to, you can. Spellweaving is an interesting thing they added later on to use other school spells. Personally, I don't particularly like it, but if you want to, you can train these other schools of magic. But the only other one I'd really recommend training is specifically life, and the reason for that is that nowadays you can get all of the healing spells that you weren't previously able to get before. So like you can get Rebirth, which is an insanely good spell. You can get Satyr, which you've always been able to get. You can get Regenerate, which is really good. You can train Sanctuary. I would personally recommend, if you're going to support, maybe training up life spells just as kind of a way to heal other people. You don't need to, but I figured it's at least worth mentioning, because in the past you could only train up to Satyr, which obviously, you know, could be useful, and on my ice I did that, but now you can learn other spells such as Rebirth and Regenerate and whatnot that are just so good at healing other people. So if you want to be a support and be a healer, it's at least worth mentioning. Now those are obviously the general schools done. Let's talk about everything else in Wizard City that is worth training in particular, or spending training points on. The first one I would say is from Diego the Duel Master right here in Unicorn Way. If you walk up to him, press the train button, you can see that there are certain certain spells that you can train. Personally, I would recommend getting Conviction. Now, Conviction isn't going to be super useful early game, and it's probably not even going to be extremely useful late game, but what it does is it gives you plus 90% stun block. And the reason why this is important is that there are certain bosses in the late game that will spam you with stuns. Specifically, like Yevgeny in Darkmoor will spam stun spells, and if you throw up a Conviction first round, you don't need to worry about that because you have 90% stun block, which is very useful. So I would recommend at least training it, and if you find a situation where you're constantly being stunned, you can throw up a Conviction right here from Diego and deal with it that way. Obviously, you can train stun block as well, but I would just say Conviction is just better overall than stun block, but obviously up to you. Next up, we have the final spell in Wizard City that I think is worth training, and I mentioned it in my last video, the deck setup video, but right here in Colossus Boulevard next to the teleporter hub, if you walk into this hut, there's a secret trainer right here named Mildred Farseer, and she has Reshuffle. Now, Reshuffle is very useful because if you use it and you have run out of cards, it will refill your deck with every card you've already discarded or used, and obviously this is going to be very useful for late game battles when the boss battle can potentially last enough time so that you run out of spells. Using a reshuffle will prevent you from just failing the battle automatically. You can use it and then all of your cards will reshuffle, and then obviously you can actually finish the fight rather than failing it and restarting it. So it's worth training from Mildred Farseer here. There's obviously also Life Trap and some Dispels here if you want, but reshuffle is the one I'd recommend spending your training point on. All right, now that we've finished all of the Wizard City spells, now we're going to be getting into the world specific spells, starting with Krokotopia. Now, Krokotopia doesn't have a lot of spells you can train, but there are some useful ones from Niles, the balance tree right here in the Oasis, right next to the Croc Sphinx. If you come here and train, you can see that he has elemental traps, weaknesses, and also blades. Now, I would recommend training the blades, the elemental and spirit blade. They're going to be useful for either you or for buffing your allies. I would recommend training both just in case, you know, you're in a battle with someone that's a spirit school instead of an elemental school. You can swap it out in your deck or add it to your deck, and that can be very useful. You can also train the traps. I usually don't, just because I find traps kind of fall off in the later game and blades tend to be better for AoEs. You can train both. There's plenty of training points to go around in this game, so if you want to spend some training points on it, go for it. All right, next up, we're getting to the spells that are just as important as Feint in this game, and that is the Astral spells, specifically Enchants. Now, I also mentioned this in my deck setup video, last video. If you come to the Sun School Trainer here in Celestia in the Floating Land, you can train up Enchants, specifically these early ones right here. If I go here, we got like Strong, Giant, Monstrous, and Gargantuan from this trainer, and what these do is it allows you to enchant spells so that they do more damage. These are essential. If you haven't gotten these yet, please get these. You can get them as soon as level 50 up to 58, and they're going to make this game so much easier by increasing the base damage of all your cards. Obviously, like if you look at just these AoEs, like Scarecrow only does 590, but with an enchant, it's going to be doing much more than that, which is going to be so useful to have. So train up enchants. Now, it is worth mentioning to talk about the other astral magics in Celestia. I would say Moon School is basically useless. Never spend training points on Moon School unless you want to get the Moon School badge, which is to train all of the Moon School spells, which, I mean, that's not something I recommend doing. And then there's also these Star School spells. I don't think any of them are particularly worth getting specifically in Celestia. They're going to become more worth it, different Star School spells later on, but in Celestia, not really worth mentioning beyond the fact that they exist. If you want, you can spend a training point on them. It's not going to be the end of the world, but I wouldn't recommend it. All right, next up, I'm going to briefly mention spell weaving. And the reason why I want to mention this is the fact that if you do spell weaving and get to Selenopolis, which you unlock, I believe, at level 50, the ability to come to these trees and do spell weaving, you can train these blade spells. And these blade spells are actually pretty useful because they give you, for 1 pip, 2 separate blades, and obviously that can be very useful. Once you get sharpened blade later on, it's going to be 2 plus 45 blades. Very good to at least train, and you train these by becoming spell weaving rank 3, which I believe you need to have completed Zafaria to do. Once you've completed Zafaria and you've done spell weaving up to the point of like rank 3, which I believe is one of the highest ranks you can get, you can train these blade spells, which I think are probably the only things that are actually really worth training in the Selenopolis spells. I'm sure the other spells have their uses, but definitely the blade is the most useful one. So pick up that blade and use it to your heart's content. It's another blade to stack in your blades, which is very good. Now, is this necessary? No, but I figured I'd at least mention it, because if I don't mention it, someone in my comments is going to go, Noah, mention spell weaving. So here you go to that one guy. I've mentioned spell weaving. All right, next let's talk about the Astral Magic that you can unlock in Zafaria. Now, you unlock these from doing side quests from Inyanga White Stripes, first at level 64, and when you've completed the Zamunda quest line, you can come here and you will get the Astral Weeks side quest, which will allow you to go to Zamunda and fix an obelisk that is in the Zamunda main area next to the queen. I think, again, you need to beat Zamunda before you unlock it, but that will allow you to unlock Berserk. Now, I'm not going to walk all the way to the pillar. I was going to, but then I realized that's a long walk, so I'm not going to. You'll find it during the quest. You get it from Inyanga White Stripes. Now, the next side quest in Zafaria is also from Inyanga White Stripes, called Bungle in the Jungle. You need to have completed Drum Jungle first, and then once you unlock that, you go to Drum Jungle and you beat up some elephants, and that will allow you to unlock the obelisk at the very beginning of the street here, which will allow you to unlock Colossal. Now, Berserk, again, I wouldn't recommend putting it in your deck, but it does allow you to train Frenzy. You need to train Berserk before you can train Frenzy, so if you did find Frenzy to be useful, you need to unlock that first. And then obviously this one will allow you to train Colossal, which is a plus 275 damage to your spell rather than the plus 225 that you had with Gargantuan up to this point, which is going to be a sizable base damage increase. So both of those are very much worth doing, and both of those are required to train the next spells in Azteca. All right, now we're here in Azteca. I mentioned this in the last video, but to train Sharpened Blade, Potent Trap, and then also train your Star School spell like Virulence right here, you need to have done those two side quests that I mentioned in the last section in Zafaria. Then you can come here and start these quests. Now, the first one I believe is third star on the left, and I believe you get that either from Tezcat here or you get it from Pakal. I'm pretty sure it's Tezcat, but that's besides the point. You need to be level 84. Once you've done that, you unlock the Star Obelisk in the 3 points, which will allow you to train, as I mentioned, this star spell right here. Isn't the most useful in the world, but it's worth mentioning because once you complete that, you can get Turn Up the Sun at level 86, and Turn Up the Sun is very, very useful because Turn Up the Sun allows you to train Sharpened Blade and Potent Trap, which will allow you to stack enchanted buffs such as a plus 45 blade with a plus 35 blade, or to stack feints with plus 80, plus 70. These are the most important spells to probably get in the game. It's not really mentioned that much, but getting Sharpened Blade and Potent Trap is going to change everything for you and make the game so much easier. So do those side quests, come to Azteca, get those done, and train up those spells. All right, so I figured I should briefly mention Shadow Magic at some point in this video. So we're going to be talking specifically about Shadow Shrike. Now, Shadow Shrike is not the best spell in the world, and it's going to become pretty useless later on once you start getting a massive amount of pierce, but I figured I should at least mention it because Shadow Shrike can be useful in these earlier game worlds, specifically like Arc 3 worlds. Shadow Shrike could be helpful. Now, what it does is it gives you plus 50% pierce, which is going to be pretty useful against bosses that spam shields and whatnot. So if you come here, you can see Shadow Shrike. Let me train that. So okay, the game is lagging right now, but we don't focus on that. It gives you plus 50% pierce, which is going to be very useful against certain bosses that spam shields and whatnot. Like there are cheat bosses that will spam minus 90 shields that you can kind of negate with this. You get it from Mooncliff's Eclipse Tower. You'll come here in the main quest and you'll free Sophia Darkside here during the main quest. So once you get to that point, obviously you can just train it. I wouldn't recommend like using this in every battle, but it can be useful if the enemies are spamming shields. So worth mentioning, I believe certain schools get it for free, but the schools that don't are gonna have to spend a training point on it. So there you go. All right, with that, we have reached basically the end of this video with the Arcanum section of this video. Now the Arcanum, you come here during the main quest in Polaris, so you'll be around level like 106 to 108 once you actually reach the Arcanum. But the Arcanum has quite a few spells that are worth training. Now, first off, to continue on with what I mentioned in Wizard City, there are certain spells that you can only access once you get to the Arcanum that you can access with training points. So like if you come here and train some life spells, you can get some more later on life spells that can potentially be quite useful, like Scion of Life. You can train different King Artorias spells here now, which is pretty cool. Basically, you just have access to even more spells than you did before. which is good. Whether you want to train these or not, that's up to you. Again, I personally don't like dual schooling, but if you want to, you can. And now you have access to even more spells than you did before. Now, finally, and a huge thing is here in the Astral section, which is going to be the biggest amount of spells you can learn at once, because there is going to be like 5 new spells that you all should really train from Kaiser and Stellar Gaze right here once you unlock the Arcanum. Now, the first one is Frenzy, which if you've been following up to this point, you should already have Berserk, so you get Frenzy. Again, whether you use it or not is up to you, but it's at least useful to train so that you have it. On top of that, he will allow you to train Epic, which is going to be the final upgrade of enchants at this point. Colossal does plus 275 to a spell, Epic adds that plus 300. And finally, and a big one that unlocks from the Astral Magic right here, is Indemnity and Aegis. Now, what these do is these protect a charm or a trap and prevent the enemy from removing them with usually a cheat. So later on, certain bosses will spam cheats, like say you can't put a universal trap on them. Like I believe Malistaire in Darkmoor actually has this cheat. You can't put a universal trap on him. And the way to prevent this is to use an indemnitied feint, and that will trigger his cheat, but then it won't be removed. It'll remove the protection from the feint. So Aegis and Indemnity are definitely worth training. And if you encounter that boss that is spamming removing your blades or spamming removing your traps, use Indemnity or Aegis on them depending on the situation, and that will stop them from removing those spells. Now, I believe that should be every spell that you need to spend training points on in this game. Any spell I didn't mention in this video is probably not worth mentioning, or just generally not useful. If I did forget something, someone leave it in the comments. I will pin a comment with everything I potentially missed, or maybe even future updates. If they add new spells, I'll make sure to add them there. But this should be basically every useful spell, and even some less than useful spells, but that were worth mentioning up until this point to spend training points on. So I hope you found this helpful. If you did, make sure to drop a like, hit the sub button. I appreciate all the support that you guys have been giving me recently on all these videos, and I appreciate that I'm able to help out the new players. This feels like such a blast from the past when I spammed out my guide videos. Now I get to spam out guide videos for a whole new kind of era of people playing Wiz, and it really does, you know, it makes me happy seeing all these new players play Wiz and seeing them encounter what we encountered as kids and, you know, stuff like that. It's just super cool to look at. So thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Have a fantastic day.